All right, we are, it's gone back up to system 2, so we will go back on down. Okay, we were looking at the authorship and dividing the books by author. We have come down to James, who wrote the Epistle of James. Jude wrote the Epistle of Jude. Paul wrote 13 letters, and you have all the letters listed there.
Sorry, sir. Can you make PowerPoint more bigger?
Yes,
Thank you, sir.
yes, let me do that. Is that better? Okay, okay. Then Peter wrote 1st and 2nd Peter, and we have a question mark for Hebrews. For many centuries, it was believed that Paul wrote Hebrews. I don't know of any major scholar today who thinks that Paul wrote Hebrews. One thing that you will note here is that the one who wrote more of the New Testament than anyone else is Luke. He wrote 28%. Even though it's only 2 books, in terms of the number of words written, Luke wrote more than anyone else. And then Paul, even though Paul wrote 13, they are not as long as Luke and Acts. And then John wrote 21%. So Luke actually wrote more of the New Testament than anyone else. Now, we could also, by the way, if you have any questions, just go ahead and feel free. Unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your questions. I would really welcome that. Sometimes that's when the best learning happens, when we have discussion.
Sir,
Yes,
yes, for as you mentioned about the book of Hebrews,
yes.
if there's any like you recommend who's the author, just for us, for the sake of the class.
Okay, yes, we will go into great detail on this. Um, the thing is, nobody knows. Probably the name that is most frequently cited today is Apollos. But, Origen, many centuries ago, wrote, who wrote Hebrews? In truth, God knows. God knows and we don't. Yes. All right. In terms of time periods, we can look at the books in chronological order. Now, we aren't sure of the exact chronology of many of the books, but pretty much we have a pretty good understanding of when they were written. We can divide this span of time into 3 periods: the period of inception, the period of expansion, and the period of consolidation. And inception would go from 6 BC, approximately the birth of Christ, up to the crucifixion. So that is basically the lifetime of Christ. The period of expansion, AD 30 to 60. And this would include much of what is in the book of Acts. The Pentecost, the ministry of Peter, the ministry of Paul. And then the period of consolidation from about AD 60 to 100 to the end of the 1st century. Now, the period of inception covers the life of Christ, but notice that there are no books that were written during this time. Christ did not write any books at all. We have books that were written about that time period, but they were written later on. So we have no books written during the period of inception. The The period of expansion is the Apostle Paul's greatest ministry, happened during that time. The book of Acts covers most of this period. During this time, we have the time when most of the epistles were written. Notice that generally speaking, the epistles were written before the Gospels. Let me just ask you this. If you wanted to find the earliest record of the Lord's Supper in the New Testament, where would you go to find it? Where would we find the earliest account of the Lord's Supper in the New Testament? What do you think? New Testament scholars, what do you think?
Mark.
Okay, Mark would be a possibility because Mark is probably the first gospel written. So if we're going to go to the Gospels, probably Mark's account is the earliest. Would there be any other account that would be even earlier than Mark? Okay, probably.
Hello, sir. Just to try.
Uh-huh. Ruel?
Sir, Book of Acts. Sir, First Corinthians chapter 11, sir.
Okay,
Book of
yes.
Corinthians.
Yes, 1 Corinthians 11 is probably the earliest account that we have of the Lord's Supper. And then Mark probably was written after that. Now, it's possible that Mark was written before that. So it's possible that Mark was our first account of the Lord's Supper. You know, the gospel writers didn't date their writings. They didn't even sign their writings. So I wish they had. And then we come to the period of consolidation, AD 60 to 100. During this time, there are those who feel that the church takes on a more structured character. And as we see the pastoral epistles, they are perhaps more structured. Now, we know that on Paul's second missionary journey, he appointed elders in the churches. So there was structure from very early on, but probably there was more structure as time went by. Now, we are less sure of what activities actually took place during this time because, Acts stops right around the year 60, a little after that, when Paul is in prison. But we have no Acts 2, Acts volume 2. And so we don't have the detail of what happened after the book of Acts, the way we do in the book of Acts. So, you know, there's a lot that we don't know in terms of what happened after the book of Acts was completed. Now, during this time, the time of consolidation, most of the apostles died. In fact, probably all of them died during this time. Some of them early on as martyrs. In fact, we know that James, the son of Zebedee, was martyred during the time of expansion, and that's recorded in Acts. Herod had him beheaded, and you know, I find it very interesting that between the years 62 and probably 68, the three great leaders of the church were all martyred. James, the brother of Jesus, who was the leader of the church in Jerusalem, was stoned in AD 62. Paul and Peter were martyred under Nero in Rome. Peter by crucifixion, Paul by beheading. He couldn't be crucified because he was a Roman citizen. Within about a 5-year span, all of the great leaders of the church were gone. Now think of how that could have affected the church. I'm sure it did affect the church in some way, but it didn't stop the growth. The church kept growing and kept growing and kept growing, even without Peter, Paul, and James. Now, if we try to look at a chronological order, it's difficult to get the chronology because we are not really certain when exactly certain books were written. And so in a sense, it's an educated guess. And we'll deal with that more when we deal with the individual books. What we have here is the order of the books in 3 great manuscripts that came in the early centuries. In the left column, we have Codex Alexandrinus and Codex Vaticanus, 2 of the great manuscripts from the 4th century. We have Codex Sinaiticus in the middle column, and we have the Latin Vulgate in the right column. The Latin Vulgate was the work of Jerome and his translation from Greek into Latin. Now, if you compare the order in which these appear in the New Testament, in these manuscripts, you'll see that they're different. In the left column, we have the Gospels and Acts, and then we have the general epistles. James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, Jude, and then we have the writings of Paul to the churches, and then the book of Hebrews, and then the writings of Paul to individuals, and then finally Revelation. Revelation is the last one in every case, and Matthew is the first one in every case. And again, in the middle column, there are different order, very similar to the first column, except the general epistles are down instead of toward the top. Hebrews is again right there in the middle of Paul's letters. And then in the right column, we have the Latin Vulgate, which is the order in which we have our books in our Bibles today. Now, I'm not sure why we followed the Latin Vulgate. Looks like Namge went out, maybe. Now, when you study the New Testament, you need to include in your studies a study of the church all the way to the year 200, because there is so much that happens between the years 100 and 200 that has a direct bearing on the New Testament. So in your study of the New Testament, you should include up to the year 200. We won't do a lot of that in this course, but I would encourage you to do that. All right, that brings us to the end of the introduction. Do you have any questions or comments that you would like to make? Questions, comments? If not, we will go on to the next section, which is the geography of the New Testament. All right. Here we're going to situate the life of Christ. We're going to concentrate primarily on the nation of Israel in this section. We're going to deal with some geography later on when we get to the expansion of the church around the Mediterranean. But here we're going to look at what was primary in the life of Christ. This is a map from the first century geographer and historian Strabo. And it probably fairly accurately shows the understanding of the world in the first century Roman Empire. You'll notice, let me see if I can draw on here. Okay, we have over here the Mediterranean Sea. And generally the Roman Empire is thought to go only to basically the Mediterranean Sea. It did expand to the east some, but notice that it goes all the way to India here. This is not the Roman Empire, but this is the map of the world, according to Strabo. Now, we know that there is also China, and the first century world knew about China. The first century Roman Empire knew about China. During the first half of the first century, there was a thriving trade between the Roman Empire and China. By AD 90, silk was imported from China through Parthia, and silk is mentioned in the book of Revelation, in Revelation 18:12. So actually a product of China is mentioned in the Bible. Did you know that? Silk from China. Of course, it doesn't say from China. Strabo probably wasn't very familiar with the actual layout of the land on east of India. So here we're going to look at primarily the geography of the Gospels, and we'll look at other geography areas later. Except for his flight to Egypt as a child, Jesus spent his entire life in Palestine. Okay, my PowerPoint is not moving. I'm not sure why here. Oh, there we go. Okay. Palestine. Palestine is named after the Pelishtim. The word is Pelishtim, meaning Hebrew, or it is Hebrew, or the Philistines who came from the island of Crete. The Philistines came from Crete. Oh, just realized we've still got this on here. So excuse me and let me get that erased. Okay. So the word Palestine is really named after the Philistines. So basically it means land of the Philistines. Palestine is located at the intersection of 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. So up here we have Europe. Well, it's not erasing. I wonder why. It's showing an eraser there, I think, but it's not going away. I'm not sure what is going on.
Or you can undo and the line will go, I believe. And erase.
I can undo. I guess it only goes back a certain number of times. That's interesting. Okay, well, I'm figuring out this technology, so please bear with me. Okay, so we have Europe. Well, now it's not writing at all. The eraser there looks like it's highlighted. But I'm not getting. Well, I'm clicking on clear all drawings. Still not going away. Well, okay, we've got this now. Anyway, from Europe, it comes. Troops came down from Europe. Troops came from Egypt. Troops came from Asia and intersected at Palestine. So you can see that this is an extremely important piece of land. In fact, according to Wright and Byrd, an army has marched through Palestine every 44 years for the past 4,000 years. And so it's a very valuable place. Okay, well, that red is still not moving. Okay. Okay, I'm not getting. Okay, there it went. My buttons weren't working. Okay, at any rate, here is an overview of the land of Palestine. You'll notice we have, in like the first top third, we have the Sea of Galilee there. And in the bottom third, we have the Dead Sea. And this is the way that it looks in modern times. That's the way it would look today as a map. And here we have it in the day of Christ. Notice that we have Upper Galilee, and Lower Galilee. This is where Christ did much of his ministry, especially Lower Galilee in the area of the Sea of Galilee. Here we have, below that, we have Samaria, ruled by the Samaritans, a place where many Jews did not want to go. And so to avoid it, they would go on the east side of the Jordan River and go down through what is called Perea. It doesn't appear on this map. But down here we have Judea. And those are the major areas here of Palestine. Again, we have the Sea of Galilee toward the north and the Dead Sea at the bottom. These are the major geographic areas of Palestine. Starting on the left, we have the coastal plain. This is the area right near the sea or the Mediterranean Sea. And then just to the right of that, we have what's called the Shephelah, and that is the foothills. These are not real mountains, but just foothills, not the plain. And then we have the Central Mountain Range just to the east of that. That goes right through the center of Palestine. That is where Jerusalem is located. And then we have, to the right of that, we have the Jordan Rift. This is the low area where the Jordan River was. The Dead Sea is the lowest spot on planet Earth. And it's far below sea level. And we'll talk about the rift a little more later. And then to the east of that, we have the Transjordan Plateau. That is where Mount Nebo is, where Moses went and looked into the Holy Land. So the Holy Land is divided into these vertical sections. If you want to see a cross section, this is the way it would be. Over on the left, we have the Mediterranean Sea, and then we have the coastal plain, and then that area called the Shephelah, a little higher in elevation. And then we have the Central Mountain Range. That is where Jerusalem is. And then you see going way down, we have the Rift Valley. And then on the other side, we have another mountain range, and this is where Mount Nebo is. This is in the country of Jordan today. Okay, what I would like to do is just sort of look at the chronology of Christ's life, starting in Bethlehem, and looking at what that country looks like. Most of the pictures that you're going to see here are ones that I have taken. And this is the way that Bethlehem looks today. It's not exactly the sleepy little village that Christ was born in. But you can, from this picture, you can see what kind of country it is. It is hilly, a lot of hills. There are some trees there, but there's a lot where there is not trees, sort of a high desert area. This is the Church of the Nativity there in Jerusalem. It is built where tradition says Christ was born. And it is a cave where they said he was born. I'm not really convinced that he was born in a cave, but that is what the tradition says. And the Church of the Nativity is built on top of that. There's an inside shot of that church. And one thing that we're going to see is that many of the places in the Holy Land where significant events happened, there are big churches there today. So we have the Church of the Nativity here in Bethlehem, in Jerusalem, over the probable place of the crucifixion and the burial of Christ. We have the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is there, and there's a church built on top of that. And that has happened in many places in the Holy Lands. Rather than leaving it as it was so that we can see what it looked like, they built churches on top of it. So I guess if you want to find a true first century town, you need to go to one that's not mentioned in the Bible. So nobody will have built a church on top of it. Do you have questions or comments here so far? Okay, let's go to Galilee now. You know, after Christ was born, they took him to Egypt for his safety and came back and settled in Nazareth. So here we have Nazareth. I'm not sure where that triangle came from. Let's see if I can just make a circle. Well, I am making squares. Oh, please be patient here. You know the old saying, please be patient, God isn't finished with me yet? I guess that's what I need to apply. At any rate, this is Nazareth down here where Christ lived. Notice right above Nazareth is a town called Sepphoris. It's not mentioned in the Bible, but it was a major city that was being built around the time of Christ's childhood. And it could be that Joseph, a carpenter, worked there in building the city of Sepphoris. They would have needed a lot of craftsmen. Matthew, quoting Isaiah 9:1, calls Galilee, Galilee of the Gentiles, because it was surrounded by Gentiles. On the west, we have Tyre and Sidon. On the east, we have the Decapolis. We have Samaria. And so this is Galilee of the Gentiles. Most of Christ's ministry was done in the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, I can't turn off the eraser, so I don't know what is happening here. Okay. Okay, now it's working. The northern part of the Sea of Galilee. So you see cities there that you're familiar with from the Gospels. Capernaum, Gennesaret, Magdala, Bethsaida is up there, Chorazin, and that is where his ministry was centered. Now, let's look at Nazareth. Let's see. Oh, this is just a wider shot of northern Palestine with Galilee there, and then you see Samaria on the left. If we go to Nazareth today, this is what it looks like. In Christ's day, it was very small. In fact, there is no historical record before the birth of Christ to Nazareth. It is not mentioned anywhere before Christ. And it was not a very significant place. It was small. That is the way it looks today. This, if you're looking at Nazareth right here and you turn around and look the other direction, this is what you see. That is the Jezreel Valley down there. And this is the Mount of Precipice. And when Christ spoke in Nazareth, the people tried to throw him off a cliff. And perhaps this is the cliff where they tried to throw him off. Now, this is the Sea of Galilee from the Mount of Beatitudes. So here we're on the west side of the Sea of Galilee, up toward the north, looking across. And here is the Sea of Galilee, again, from the Mount of Beatitudes, looking down to the south. And this is the Sea of Galilee from the Arbel Cliffs. Just to the west of the Sea of Galilee, there are tall cliffs, and there's a big valley in between. And the wind from the west would whip down through that valley and cause sudden storms. So here I am standing very close to the edge of those cliffs, looking down, and you can see how far down that is. The village that you see there up on the left-hand side is the town of Magdala. Who can tell me anything about Magdala? Does that name ring a bell with you? Magdala?
It's a very new name to me.
New name. Okay. Okay. There is a person in the Gospels who is from Magdala. Can anybody tell me who that is? Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene. Mary from Magdala. This is the village that she was from. I took this picture in 2010, and just the year before that, they had discovered a magnificent synagogue right down there near the edge of the lake. It had not been excavated very much at that point, but we've been back twice since, and it has been excavated. And it was no doubt a synagogue where Jesus taught. You know, we are told that he taught in all the synagogues in Galilee. And so surely it was one where he taught. On the Sea of Galilee, these are the Arbel Cliffs. So see that big valley in between? When it talks about how the disciples and Christ were caught in a storm, those winds would suddenly whip down there and cause violent storms. And this is the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. And perhaps it was there that Jesus cast the demons into the pigs, and they ran down into the water and were drowned. So this is Galilee. Let's now go, sorry, this is the southern shore of the Sea of Galilee. You can see there's rich farmland there. Let's take a look at the Jordan River. This is the map of the Jordan River going from the Sea of Galilee down to the Dead Sea. All the activity associated with the Jordan happened right here. The Israelites crossing the Jordan on dry ground, John baptizing in the Jordan River, it all happened right here. This is the way the Jordan River looks today. And another shot of it. In Jesus' day, it was a lot larger than this. Today, it's not as large because water is being siphoned off for farming, irrigation. And so it's diminished in size. But in Jesus' day, it was quite a bit larger. And the Jordan Valley looks like this. On the left, we have the central range of mountains in Palestine. On the right, we have what they call the Transjordan Plateau. This is where Mount Nebo is. And then you come down to farther into the valley. That area is called the Gor. And you get down closer to the river. That area is called the Zor. And then you have the Jordan riverbed itself. Okay. Hey, it's time for a break. Let's take a 10-minute break here and we'll resume in 10 minutes. Okay?
Okay, sir.
Have a good
Sir,
break.
probably I will leave, and after that I will enter again because I need to change the device.
Oh, okay. Sure,
Okay.
that's fine. Yeah. All right. Okay. I don't know what is happening with the PowerPoint here. So hold on just a second. Okay, let's see if this will work. All right. Let's go to Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi, who can tell me what important thing happened in Caesarea Philippi in Christ's lifetime? What did Christ do at Caesarea Philippi, or what event happened there? Can anybody think of it? All right. It was in the area of Caesarea Philippi that Jesus asked the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they said, "Well, people say that you're one of the prophets, you're Jeremiah, or you're Elijah." And Jesus said, "Well, who do you say that I am?" And what did Peter say? What did Peter say?
Christ, Messiah.
All right, you are the Christ, or as Matthew says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, it's interesting that Christ would ask that question in Caesarea Philippi. Caesarea Philippi is way up in the northern part of Israel. It's right at the base of Mount Hermon. And as we look at the history of it, we'll see that there was a lot of pagan worship, pagan activity going on in that place. One of the main features there is the cave, this cave that we see here. And there's a little more close-up picture of it. Caesarea Philippi, during the Old Testament, seems to have been a place of Baal worship. The Old Testament name contains the word Baal. During the Hellenistic times, after Alexander the Great conquered this area, it was a place for the worship of the Greek god Pan. Pan is characterized by a man that is a man from the waist up, but a goat from the waist down. And he was worshiped here. And then during the Roman era, there was a large temple to the Roman emperor here. This city was reestablished by Philip, who was the tetrarch over this area, and he named it after Caesar, Caesarea, and after himself, Philippi. Now, it's interesting that Jesus would choose such a place to ask the disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And here was the first place that he accepted the title of Messiah. Here is a niche where undoubtedly some of the statues of the gods were kept. One of the headwaters of the Jordan River was here. There are 3 headwaters, and it used to come from inside the cave, but because of earthquakes, it now comes outside the cave and goes down and forms the Jordan River. Now let's go to Judea. Judea, down in the south. Here we have a map of the Dead Sea. You'll notice in the upper left-hand corner, there is Jerusalem. Jerusalem being the main city of Judea. And then we have the Dead Sea down here. This is a picture of the Dead Sea taken from Masada, the great Roman fortress there. Another picture of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea has no outlet. So it's very dense. The mineral content of the water is very dense. And you've heard of people floating on the Dead Sea. Well, I did it. Had to do one of those tourist things. So I went out and I floated in the Dead Sea. This is the Judean desert, the Judean wilderness, as seen from Masada. It's a very arid place. There's hardly any growth, no real trees. here you can see there are dry riverbeds, but there is hardly any growth in them. There are a few bushes down there, but it is a very arid place. The New Testament says that Jesus went in to the wilderness to be tempted of Satan. And this is the way it looks from Masada. If you'll notice over on the left-hand side, there's a big square. That was a Roman encampment back in about the year AD 64, when the Romans took the fortress of Masada. They had destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70. This would have been 74. They destroyed Jerusalem in AD 70, and they came against the last remnant of the Jews, which was in Masada. They built a huge ramp to be able to take that fortress, which originally had been built by Herod the Great. And another shot of the Judean wilderness. Now we will come to Jerusalem. And this is the way Jerusalem looks today. Of course, the dominating building there is the Dome of the Rock Mosque there on the Temple Mount. A few shots of Jerusalem. That is the Mount of Olives ahead of us. We are on the Jerusalem side of the Kidron Valley. So that valley there is the Kidron Valley, the valley that Jesus walked through when he was betrayed on the Mount of Olives in Gethsemane, and he walked through the valley to Jerusalem. And I've been to Jerusalem 3 times, each time wanting to retrace Jesus' journey from the Garden of Gethsemane all the way to Calvary. And I think each time I'm getting a little closer. I think he probably walked in the area of that road down there. And the second time we went to Jerusalem, we tried to retrace his steps, and we walked up here to the left. And then I saw the road down below, which is probably where he walked. So the last time we were there, that is where we walked and came back up into the city. This is the Valley of Hinnom. This goes down the west side of Jerusalem, west and south. The Valley of Hinnom and Kidron Valley join there south of Jerusalem. Does anybody know anything about the Valley of Hinnom? Any of you Bible scholars know anything about the Valley of Hinnom? What if I called it Gehenna? Do you know anything about Gehenna? No? In the New Testament, the word for hell is the word Gehenna. The Hinnom Valley here was a place in the Old Testament where people sacrificed children to the gods, human sacrifice. It was a city dump where garbage was burned, and it was always smoky, and the fire was always going. And Jesus talks about hell in terms of Gehenna, the Valley of Hinnom. I guess Jesus felt like that was a good description of hell, where the fire is never quenched and the worm continues to eat. The last time Dickie and I were in Jerusalem, we went walking through the Valley of Hinnom, not really wanting especially to go to the Valley of Hinnom, but we wanted to go into Jerusalem a different way, and we got lost. We got lost in the valley of Hinnom. You could say we were lost in hell, Gehenna. And we did find our way out, though. Here is the Mount of Olives. And here is the Garden of Gethsemane. These olive trees are here in the garden, and they are very ancient. They probably were not there, these actual ones, when Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane. But from what I understand, the way olive trees reproduced, the trees that were there when Christ was may have been the ancestors of these. These would be the descendants of those trees when Christ was there. This is what some people feel may have been Golgotha or Calvary, the place of the skull. And people say, well, you know, it looks sort of like a skull. I don't really think it is. I don't think it's where Calvary was. This actually did not become known as a possibility until the 1800s. A much more qualified location would be the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And we will look at that here. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built by the mother of Constantine in the 300s. And as was the church there in Bethlehem. The tradition has it that it was under this church where Christ was crucified and buried, and of course, rose again. It has tradition going all the way back many centuries. And I feel that this is the most probable place where Christ was crucified and buried. Of course, it didn't look like that then. This is all built afterwards. But it's a very interesting place. If Christianity has any sacred place, this would be it. Both Protestants, Catholics, and Eastern Orthodox view it as a holy place. There is the dome that is in it. Now, Judea was part of the Roman Empire. And you can see a map here of the Roman Empire with Judea way on the east end of the Mediterranean. The Roman Empire borders on the Atlantic Ocean in the west, the Rhine and Danube rivers in the north, Parthia on the east, and the Sahara Desert on the south. So it extended about 5,000 kilometers, 3,100 miles, from England to the Persian Gulf and Upper Egypt. The Mediterranean Sea was a Roman lake. Okay, this is just sort of an introductory view of the geography that we're going to be dealing with here in New Testament introduction. Do you have any questions or comments here? If you could, I would really urge you to make a trip to Israel. And I know it's not easy. When I was in seminary, my wife and I took off 2.5 months and went to Europe, and we visited like 14 countries in Europe. We got as far as Athens and Corinth, and we asked ourselves, do we want to go to Israel? And we thought, no, there are always tours that are going. We can always go on a tour. Well, 40 years later, we still hadn't gone to Israel. And we finally did in 2010. And I would really recommend it to help you just understand the New Testament better, to understand the location of places. And you'll come to understand that Christ had to be really fit, because he walked a lot. And when you walk from the Garden of Gethsemane to Jerusalem and back, you're going to be doing some climbing. And to understand things like that, it really gives insight into understanding the New Testament. So any questions or comments before we go on? All right. Okay, we will go to the historical background. Now, normally, before now, I deal with the question of the history of textual criticism or New Testament criticism. But I'm not going to take the time to do that because there's so much that we want to get in. And so that is why on Moodle, I have put my notes there. And let's see if I have that here. Here we have, see this essay, Hertwig, some notes on the history of New Testament criticism. You need to read that and you're going to be tested on it. So there's going to be a quiz over this. And let's see if I can open that up. I guess I have to log in again. So some notes on the history of textual or of New Testament criticism. And you can see it goes on quite a ways, 22 pages. So be sure that you read that and are ready to have a quiz. Okay. Okay. Okay, at this point, we are going to begin to look at the historical background of the New Testament. It's crucial to understand the background of the New Testament in order to understand its message. When the Old Testament closes, the major world power is Persia under Darius. But as we open our New Testament, we now see that Rome is the new world power. Everything that happens in the New Testament happens against the background of the Roman Empire. Jesus was born at Bethlehem because of an enrollment called for by Caesar Augustus. Whether or not one should pay tribute to Rome was a live political and theological issue in Jesus' day. Remember, Jesus was asked about that. Jesus was sentenced to death by a Roman prefect. He was executed by a Roman form of execution. And the role of prefect came to be called procurator under Claudius. The Apostle Paul, the most important spreader of Christianity after Jesus himself, was a Roman citizen. The book of Acts is an account of how the gospel went from Jerusalem to Rome. When it ends, Paul is under house arrest in Rome under the surveillance of a Roman guard. In the book of Revelation, we see a Rome which is turned against the church and is savagely persecuting it. You know from the Old Testament that Babylon conquered the state of Jerusalem in 586 BC. Jerusalem, including the Jewish temple, was destroyed, and much of the population was deported to Babylon. The Jews who went to Babylon, though, did not abandon their Jewish beliefs, their Jewish religion. Even though they could no longer offer sacrifices in the temple, they studied the law and observed the teachings as much as possible. About 50 years after Babylon ended the Jewish state, Cyrus, king of Persia, conquered Babylon. Under Cyrus, the Jews were permitted to return to Jerusalem, and in time, those who returned rebuilt the city and the temple by about 516. During this time, the three pillars of Judaism developed. First of all, the sacred writings, the Old Testament. Secondly, the synagogue was developed. And third, what we call rabbinism, that is the emergence of rabbis, teachers of the law. Now, during this time, we see emerge a dual power structure in Palestine. The area was under the control of Persia, and yet the Jews, the priests, had political power there. And this kind of duality, later perhaps a trinity of power, persists until, for the most part, until the times of the New Testament. The Persian era came to an abrupt end from Greece, when the forces from Greece under Alexander the Great in the 4th century came into the area. In 334 BC, Alexander defeated Persia, and in 332, he conquered Palestine. Alexander's goal was to Hellenize, or to promote Greek culture in all of the known world. The process of Hellenization, that is the promotion of Greek culture, is symbolized by 5 things which were brought to the conquered countries. Number 1, the gymnasium. And by gymnasium, that wasn't just a place to work out. It was a place of education. There were the guilds, like trade unions, where people from the same occupation would get together. There was the stadium, athletics, where the games were played. There was the theater. And most importantly, there was the Greek language. Well, Alexander did a thorough job, and for the next 1,000 years, Greek culture prevailed in the Mediterranean area. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his kingdom was divided among his 5 generals. Ptolemy ruled over Egypt and southern Syria. Antigonus ruled over northern Syria. Seleucus ruled over Babylon. Lysimachus was given Thrace and western Asia Minor, and Cassander ruled over Macedonia and Greece. So it was divided among Alexander's generals. In 301 BC, Seleucus defeated Antigonus and took control over his territory, resulting then in 4 kingdoms. The most important empires for our interest is that of Ptolemy in Egypt. We call it the Ptolemaic Empire, and that of Seleucus in Syria and Babylonia, and we call that the Seleucid Empire. Now, Palestine was mainly under Egypt, under the Ptolemies, from 320 to the beginning of the 2nd century. In 198 BC, it came under the control of the Seleucid Empire of Syria. So after Alexander dies, it's under Egypt. But then the Seleucid Empire from the north comes down, drives out the Egyptians, and takes over Palestine. Now, under both the Ptolemies and the Seleucid Empire, Palestine was given quite a bit of autonomy. It was under a foreign state, but Judea was considered a temple state. Its law was the law of Moses. Its rulers were the priests. So the Ptolemies ruled over Palestine for 122 years, from 320 to 198 BC. At this time, or during this time, the Septuagint version, the Greek version of the Old Testament, came into being. In 198, Syria defeated Egypt and took over Palestine under Antiochus III. So 198, the Seleucid Empire defeats the Egyptians and takes over Palestine. Now, Antiochus IV, or Antiochus Epiphanes, as he was called, meaning God manifest. So Antiochus, God manifest, came to power in 175 BC. Now, he appointed as high priest for the Jews those who bribed him the most. The priest at that time was Onias II, who was a Zadokite priest. Now, Zadok was the priest when David was king, and his family line kept the priesthood down to this time. So Onias III was the Zadokite priest. His brother Jason offered a higher bribe to Antiochus and became high priest. Jason attempted to impose Greek culture upon the Jewish society. Then a man by the name of Menelaus offered Antiochus a greater bribe, and Antiochus made him high priest in place of Jason. Jason was the last Zadokite priest to serve. So this line, going all the way back to David's time, ends with the time when Jason is no longer high priest. You know, it's interesting that during this time, the high priests are attempting to impose Greek culture onto the Jews. Greek culture that in many ways is not compatible with Judaism. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, okay, the ruler of the Syrians, moved against Egypt, but he was stopped by the Romans. Jason, the former high priest, who was in exile, heard a rumor that Antiochus Epiphanes had been killed, and he returned to Jerusalem, and he took control of Jerusalem from Menelaus. Now, Antiochus saw this as an act of rebellion, so he returned to Jerusalem and he ransacked the city. he destroyed parts of the city. In 168 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes plundered the temple and began an attempt to stamp out Judaism. So carrying out the rite of circumcision, observing the Sabbath, and possessing the Jewish scriptures were all punishable by death. So Antiochus Epiphanes is trying his best to get rid of Judaism. He reinstated Menelaus as the high priest, and on December 31st, 167 BC, Antiochus plundered the temple, desecrating it, and establishing worship of himself there. The Jews reacted with horror at that, and many of them denied the validity of Menelaus's priesthood. He converted the Jewish temple into a shrine to the Olympian Zeus. He set an image of Zeus on the altar, and he offered a sow, a female pig, on the altar. Now, for 3 years, this abomination of desolation, to use Daniel's and Jesus's words, dominated the temple. During this time, a group of Jews who were zealous for the Jewish law arose, and they were called the Hasidians, meaning the pious ones. Let me see if I can write that on here. Well, I'm getting that again. I guess for some reason, it's only writing straight lines. No, I can't do it. Anyway, I'll give you the term. It's Hasidians, and let me spell it for you. Hasideans. It means the pious ones. And they later gave rise to the Philippines. So in the midst of this desecration of the temple, the Hasidians formed. And they formed as a group to preserve the Jewish way of life. In 167 BC, when the elderly priest by the name of Mattathias in the city of Modin refused to obey the command to offer heathen sacrifices, he killed the king's agent and demolished his altar, and the Maccabean revolt began. For a year, Mattathias led a group of vigilantes, guerrilla fighters, who fought against Hellenism and that had been imposed by the Syrians to the point of forcibly circumcising children. So they did the opposite of Antiochus. Antiochus forbid the Jews to circumcise. Mattathias and the Maccabeans forced people to have their children circumcised. So the Maccabean revolt began. It got its name from Judas Maccabeus, which means the hammer. That was Mattathias' son, who became the first great leader after the death of Mattathias. Judas had quick military successes. And in 164 BC, he returned to Jerusalem. He returned Jerusalem to the leadership of the rulership of the Jews. Exactly 3 years after the sow was sacrificed on the altar, the temple was cleansed and rededicated. At that time, a new Jewish festival was commemorated called Hanukkah, or the Feast of Lights, or the Feast of Dedication, which is mentioned in John 10:22. Did you know that Jesus celebrated Hanukkah? He did, the Feast of Dedication. There is a tradition, that they only had a limited amount of oil in the temple. And they didn't have enough oil to keep the candles burning, the lamps burning, but that God did a miracle. And the lamps kept burning even after the oil was gone. And that is why it's called the Feast of Lights. And this new feast took place here during the intertestamental times. The war continued, and in 160, Judas was killed in battle. And his brother Jonathan, who was high priest, succeeded him. He carried on the campaign from 160 to 142, and Jonathan began rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. He was assassinated in 142 BC. And his brother Simon, another son of Mattathias, succeeded him and won independence for the Jewish state in 142 BC. So at this point, no one now is ruling over the Jewish state. They are independent. Simon was made high priest, political leader, and military commander, and it was given to his descendants as well. So all three of those, he was high priest, he was political leader, and he was military commander. Now, he was assassinated in 135 BC. For almost 80 years, the Jews enjoyed political independence. And this is the only time that they would experience political independence from the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC until the middle of the 20th century. Those 80 years were the only time when they were independent of other states. Now, from the time of the restoration of the temple, there arose a religious division among the Jews. Those who supported the priest eventually became the Sadducees. Those who opposed the ruler priest were the Hasidians, who eventually became known as the Pharisees. So the Sadducees and the Pharisees that we see in Jesus' time have their roots up here at this time in the history of Judaism. John Hyrcanus, the son of Simon, succeeded him and fought off Ptolemy, and for a while was subjected to Syria. He was the first Hasmonean ruler who was not from the original Maccabean family. So we had Mattathias and we had his sons, and now we come to a grandson, the first one not originally in that family. The term Hasmonean is the name of the dynasty that was in power from John Hyrcanus until Antigonus in 37 BC. It comes from the name of the great-grandfather of Mattathias, and they are called the Hasmonean dynasty. So here in the PowerPoint, we mentioned that he was the first Hasmonean ruler. Okay, our time is up. Do you have questions here? Questions or comments? Okay, we're throwing a lot of names at you, aren't we?
Yes.
A lot
A
of
lot of
names,
names.
a lot of names, and a lot of dates.
Yeah.
And do your best to learn the material, get the general view of how things were. If you have any questions or comments, we can take those next time, and we'll take up here next time. All right. If there are no questions or comments, we will stop for tonight. May God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see
Thank you, sir.
you next Tuesday morning. God bless you.
God bless you, sir. Thank